Hey, what's up? Jimmy Smith here on my first attempt at a podcast. Here with Ryan Moody, we're discussing current events in MMA. One of them, of course, TJ Dillashaw relinquishing his title. We'll also talk about kinetic tape and whether or not it's worth it, and also me and Joe Rogan in an elevator. So there, Ryan, I just did everything you have to talk about, so you can't back out of any of it. Got that?
Yeah, you actually knocked that out in about 28 seconds, so you did pretty good.
That's what I do. So
it's a lot to cover.
Sure. But so let's start at the very beginning. TJ Dillashaw today voluntarily, I want to make that a point, voluntarily relinquishes his title because of a non-specific problem with his testing. No one knows exactly what it is. It has not been released publicly. He kind of got out ahead of it, came out and said, I'm relinquishing my title until this test is this problem is dealt with. Now, the first thing I noticed, having been in this business for 20 years, he didn't deny anything. I found that strange. That was the first thing that kind of jumped off the page to me is, hey, I'm really sorry about this whole thing, this test. He was very vague about everything, but he didn't come out with a flat denial. He didn't come out with, I've never used PEDs. This is erroneous. As soon as we're at the bottom of it, I will get my title back. It sounded more like a mea culpa than a protest of some kind, than a defense. It seemed more like, I mean, I hate to say this, it sounded like someone who got caught, not someone who is being falsely accused. That's the first thing that I noticed from his statement is he doesn't deny using PEDs.
Well, it's interesting.
Did that stand out to you, Ryan?
No. What stood out to me, I guess, more than anything else is number one, like you said, he got out in front of this. He accepted what I thought was a relatively short fine. I mean, for an in-competition fail, for whatever it is, right. 1 year at $10,000. As you mentioned, he didn't come out, and I don't want to paint broad brush here, but he did not come out and say, this is a mistake, this was a tainted supplement. He didn't cite it. But what stood out to me, I guess, in the same sense is he didn't cite it. USADA didn't cite it.
Right.
So we may never know what he actually failed for. That's my only concern, is knowing that the other side of it is, and you almost kind of said it there in a way, if we're talking about the only court that matters right now, which is the court of public opinion, you said it yourself. He's guilty, right? Like, I mean, he basically owned it and said, hey, listen, I did something I shouldn't have done. I've been caught. I'm going to relinquish my title and go on my way. I think that was what stood out to me the most is there's no even attempt at a defense for this.
Right.
And this is a guy this guy's been in the ringer for this. I mean, I'm sure someone's probably screaming another UFC fighter, but Cody Garbrandt would come out all the time and say, oh, when we were at Team Alpha Male, you were cheating. You were showing us how to cheat. You were showing how to hide the cheat. And we've all seen, somebody must have tweeted a million times, the picture of TJ eating like a salad. And behind him, there's just tons of, and it's probably vitamins, right? But it doesn't matter because it's just tons of pill bottles. And people see this and think that he's got supplements on top of supplements on top of supplements, combined with the physical appearance stuff, of course. But yeah, I mean, to me, for somebody to come out so swiftly, accept a punishment prior to even the organization citing that they've done something wrong, relinquish his belt, and almost wash his hands of it, like, good for him in a way. Like, he wants to move on. But at the same time, I think the elephant in the room is this is a January 19th drug test, right? It's March 20th today, man. And to me, I know this is a broken record for so many people, but we have to know faster. We have to know better. And we have to really kind of get this streamlined here. If this is football, if this is baseball, if this is tennis, man, I don't care. Somebody wants to go do PEDs, go right ahead. But when you're getting in a cage and you theoretically are going to hurt someone else, I don't want you doing anything. It's really important to me.
What I find interesting about almost every PED case, and I've said this before, and this is the way I see it, the fans in MMA are like someone who's been cheated on before, where we don't buy the excuses anymore, where, yeah, we've all heard the tainted supplements and this and that, and I didn't knowingly do that, and this and that. We're a very jaded fan base. But I think what's happening more and more is it kind of reminds me of like you call the cops because a lot of people are speeding down your street. You want a speed trap to catch everybody, but it ends up catching you and your friends and your family. Well, that's not what I wanted. People want a clean sport, but they really don't like it when their fighter gets busted, when cards get moved, when things get shifted, when there are delays and there are controversies. You want a clean sport, but a lot of fans don't want to pay the price of a clean sport. If you remember in cycling, when Lance Armstrong got busted, they couldn't find anyone to give his awards to. The second place guy got busted. The third place guy got busted. Everybody got busted. So it was almost like a wash. And I think fans are kind of seeing that where, hey, well, we wanted a clean sport, but we didn't want to see everyone get taken down. When a clean test or a card where everyone pisses clean is a story, that tells you a lot. And I think fans are upset. Like, yeah, we wanted a clean sport. We don't want everybody getting busted all the time, which is, it seems like that's what's happening.
Well, I think the interesting thing about that is if you talk about general fans, right, to me, when I think about fighters that were going to take or had taken, I generally feel like a lot of people point towards your Cyborgs, point towards your Brock Lesnar's, and we've yet to really have, I mean, we did have the little bump with Lesnar, but we've yet to come out and have those people popped. But I think the other side of this is, you know, not to answer your analogy with another analogy, but that's essentially what I'm going to do.
Go ahead and do it. Yeah.
To me, as a fan, we want these supernatural performances, right? We want to see somebody go out for 20 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever the case is going to be, and do these superhuman things, right? Absorb punishment at a rate that a normal person couldn't, and then return fire just as much. But when we find out, hey, wait a second, that person that was doing all those supernatural things, they were actually on some supernatural stuff, we all of a sudden act up in arms and say, how dare this person do this? You know, to me, it's kind of like a double-edged sword. You know, listen, I want TJ to go out and go a full 5-round war with Cejudo. I actually wanted him to win that fight, if we're being honest with each other. But I also have to accept that in order for him to do that, maybe he felt like he had to gain an advantage, and maybe part of that advantage wasn't something that was legal. And maybe a whole bunch of people are doing it, or maybe he's the only one. But I know that at least, as you said, as the sport has progressed, we're learning more and more people that you might never have thought would have been cheating or could have cheated are doing it. And you have to figure out, you know, where is this coming from? You know, these people, you know it probably better than I. These people aren't just individual fighters that show up one day. There's a gym, there's a camp, there's a network of people, and there's someone within that network failing in multiple fighters' camps, whether they're not being proactive about checking about what's banned or checking about what's blocked, or maybe they don't even care. Maybe they're just getting things that are truly tainted, and maybe it isn't the athlete's fault. But at the end of the day, the problem is TJ is the one that took the supplement. He's the one that's going to be convicted for it, essentially, and he's the one that's going to live with those ramifications. And right now, that's a year out of the sport, $10,000 out of his pocket, and probably a whole bunch of fans that are never going to look at him the same again, because they're always going to label him a cheater. And, you know, to look at that, John Jones, your prime example. There's people that will never look at John Jones without an asterisk. And that's all there is to it.
Hey, two things you never want to see get made is laws and sausage, right? You've heard that expression. There's two things you never want to get made. You don't want to see a fighter get made either. And I think, like you're saying, you pull back that curtain and you go, wait a second, man, do I really want to know what this fighter goes through to get there, to get the performances that I love, that I really want to see? Do you really want to see that? We do. We all want a clean sport. We all want a clean sport. And you know, it's one of those things where kind of the more we peel back the curtain and the more fighters get busted and the more these kind of things happen, an irony to me is the UFC gets more crap for USADA than Bellator gets for doing nothing. Meaning Bellator leaves it up to commissions. That's commission's job. That's not our problem. The UFC, in a sense, trying to get ahead of the problem or being proactive, gets more crap because like you said, the delays in when the test comes out, the punishments are different every time. They shifted a card for John Jones, things like that. Once you make it your problem, it's your problem. And issues with that enforcement or what we do about it become your issue. It's not someone else, it's you. And so this is another thing where, you know, accordingly he's out for a year. And once again, we have no idea what the test is for. So the order of operations here is, to me, totally backwards. We don't know why TJ Dillashaw is giving in his title. We don't know why he's losing a year. We don't know why he's losing money, because a punishment is coming before the sentence. You don't get convicted of a crime, but you don't know what it is. You find that out when you're arrested. So it's this weird, the way it's handled is so weird and seems so arbitrary, and it's so hard for the fans to understand. It really doesn't help anybody.
No, I agree. And like you said, there's almost no due process here. It's, and maybe, and I guess in all fairness, we have to understand that maybe that was him. Maybe he elected.
He could have waived it. Yeah. I mean, we don't know.
Maybe he elected. And if that's the case, that's fine. But as a fan, I also want to know that. Like, I guess we're shown so much. And I'll go back. We don't even have to use a different fighter. If you remember, maybe you watched them, maybe you didn't. I actually think you narrated some of them, ironically enough. They had used some of your snippets. When they were showing TJ train, he was doing all these insane movements. And it seemed like this answer as to why he looks the way he does. There was concerns about his weight cut and his health. And you see all these things take place. And then, whether they mean to or not, right? UFC is kind of connecting those dots for you. Like, oh, here's TJ. Oh, he's leaned out. Oh, he's doing all these insane exercises. He's in the best shape of his life. That's why he can cut weight. It's why he can get down to this weight and fight here. And then now we learn, like you said, maybe there was something more to it. Maybe there wasn't. But I almost think like we need almost like a streamline of here's the fighter. Here's what's going to happen. Here's the due process of when we're going to announce these things. Here's when they can, quote unquote, appeal these things. It seems silly to say that you appeal it. It's either in your system or it's not. But nevertheless, they should have that same window where they can say, listen, you messed up. We're going to test again. We're going to independent test, whatever the case may be. And we follow this thing out because the end result is what it leaves you with is you check Twitter or you go to a website and you say, TJ Dillashaw dropped his belt. He's suspended for a year? I didn't know anything about this. And that's when you learn about it. You learn about everything. Like you said, it's the conviction and the crime and the punishment all in the same statement. And that never happens. You don't get pulled over and the cops say, all right, you were going 64 and a 55. Go ahead and pay me the $78 now. You'll get your point on your license in a couple days. There's nothing else you're going to do about this. Have a great afternoon, sir. That's just not how things work. Yeah. And we're used to that system. I'm not saying they need to adopt it, but that's what we're used to as fans. And I think generally speaking, other sports kind of follow that same protocol too, but not MMA. It's just, like I said, it's dropped on you all at once. And I guess that's why it's interesting to be an MMA fan, but it also leaves so many things in limbo. I mean, they wanted a Cejudo rematch. Cody's been pushing for a rematch. Now you don't know what you're going to do with any other fight. It just really kind of screws things up. I mean, think about a fighter like Aljamain Sterling. Where does he fit in to all of this now? How would you like to be in that weight class and wake up and say, well, now you don't have a champion? And it's funny because we throw interim belts around all over the place, right? But when there's a need for an interim belt, it kind of diminishes the whole thing. Now there's really a need for one. The champion stepped away. But it definitely is a strange thing to go through. And I think, overwhelmingly over the past 13 minutes of this, I think the best thing that you can take away from is it leaves a lot of questions and it doesn't give you a lot of answers, but it also hurts the sport a lot. And that's what I think anybody who really cares about MMA cares about. They care about the sport. They care about the fighters, the competition, all the good things that we try to prop up. And this is just constantly one big negative thing that we have to deal with.
By the way, excellent point in my opinion. Bravo. 2 caveats I would add to that. Number one is, imagine if Dillashaw had beaten Cejudo. We'd have interim titles in 2 divisions. He would have jammed up 2 divisions with this. Okay? So you're starting to see the danger of these super fights and double champs and all this stuff. One of them steps in it, and it backs up 2 weight classes. I'm not a huge fan of the super fights. I think they're using them way too often, too many double champs, and it dilutes it. So there's that. If he had beaten Cejudo, imagine that. Oh, great. Now we have to have an interim champion, two weight classes. Number 2, I think saying he's going to be out for a year, and just like you, I don't know what he tested positive for, or what the deal is, or how long that's going to last, and blah, 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 blah. We're talking about a year out. That's not an interim time period. I think whoever wins now should be the champion. You're stripped. You gave up the title. It is over. You are not champion. I think whoever wins, let's say Marlon Moraes, Aljamain Sterling, whoever wins that should be the champion. I don't think this should be an interim situation. He's just out too long.
Let me ask you this, because it's interesting you said that. This was the first ESPN card. Is it easy to say that maybe it even tainted that card?
You could say that, of course. Yeah.
It was such a big deal. I mean, they really did. I mean, I know in retrospect, it's hard to compare the first Fox to the first ESPN because the sport is just, I mean, to say it's grown, to say it's exploded, total understatement. It's 2 completely different places. But now when I think back to that first ESPN card, unlike the first Fox card where I think of the war, I'm going to think of, oh yeah, that was the time Cejudo really just smoked Dillashaw, and then Dillashaw wanted a rematch, and then all of a sudden Dillashaw failed that drug test 3 months later. That's not good. Like, that's not a good memory to have. It's not a good connection to make. And they just extended this thing. They actually, let me, since we'll parlay into I guess that for a moment, what they've just done, I think it's so interesting. I listened to the Megan O'Leary, Dana White thing, right? And it's so odd. Like, Dana blocked me on Twitter, so I'm exclusive company with this. But to hear him sit there and say, we're in the best place now. We can do whatever we want, this, that, and the other. I sit there and I think to myself, like, hey, wait a second, man. You're going to sit here and tell me, well, we couldn't give you discounts through other providers, because that's just the way things work. You buy your pay-per-view through DirecTV, through, Verizon, Comcast, whoever, your local carrier. We can't trickle a discount down to you. But now that it's on ESPN, we can. Why couldn't you have done that with Fight Pass? You actually had all these tools before, proprietary in a way to yourself. But now that you're telling me that you've partnered with ESPN for 7 years, all of a sudden now, you've got this discount you can give me and all this stuff. It's like, at the end of the day, you've really oversaturated us. To your point before, they have fallen in love to almost to the point where I don't want to hear it. The double champ super fights. To me, super fights don't need to be about 2 belts. As you said, there's a lot of terrors that come with 2 belts. Hold up 2 divisions. Look at Conor McGregor, win belt, really doesn't defend belt. You've got all these problems. I get it for the fighter. It's a great accomplishment. Visually, it's striking to see DC wear both belts. But at the same time, you've also got another side of it. Guy like Stipe not getting rematches. It has its problems. When you're constantly building these super fights to a casual fan, how do you get out of a super fight just back to a regular fight, just back to a single belt? You really can't do it because you've invested so much in this. In super fights, to me, used to be the biggest names of the sport. Like 2 people you wouldn't think you would get to see fight, right? To me, Brock and DC, Brock and John Jones, well, that'd be a super fight to me to a sense because I really don't expect them to fight. So when it happens, I'm going to be interested. As a fan, I don't need a belt on the line, right? I don't need a belt on the line to do that. To me, Ben Askren and Robbie Lawler, well, that was a super fight. I never expected that fight to happen. I didn't need it to be for a belt. As a fan, it was a super fight. Well, I don't know if you're building around casuals or what you're doing, but you're setting the bar so high to the point that you have to feel like you kind of have to continue to raise it to get people to stay interested. What are we going to do? Your most dominant champion, in my opinion, recently, you couldn't even sell him. Demetrius Johnson couldn't draw a house. You had to get rid of him. So what is the point? It really doesn't make sense the way they kind of do some of these things. I know I left you a lot to deal with there.
Well, no. But the thing to me is that it skews our perspective of greatness in that I think, for example, Jose Aldo's run at featherweight is, to me, eclipses Conor's accomplishments as a double champ. Being a double champ is tough and blah, 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 and all those things great. To beat a row of really tough contenders for years and years and years and years, being a double champ requires really one good fight. One good fight, and you've won 2 belts. All right, I'm not disparaging double champions. I'm saying the consistency of being a long-running champion who takes out everyone who steps in front of him for years. That's an incredible accomplishment. And I think one of the things the double champ era does is it takes away our appreciation of that. When we talked about, GSP retiring, when you look at his career, I had Dan Hardy on SiriusXM, and I was interviewing him about GSP, and I said, do you think with the double champ era, we'll ever see a title run like GSP's again? Where he just 170, line them up, I'll knock them down, I don't care who they are. And he had trouble answering that question because it's, God, guys jump up for the extra money and all this stuff. Will we see those long title runs? Or is it, hey, I want that big pay-per-view money, I'm skipping up weight classes? Will we ever see those runs that made Jose Aldo, GSP, and Anderson Silva the greatest of all time? I don't know.
I would say no. I mean, but the other side of that is...
Like Sugar Ray Robinson, 200 pro fights. Are we ever going to see that again? No. Willie Pep, those old school boxers, we're never going to see that schedule again.
I think a fan, a casual fan, and I mean, I've seen fans on Twitter in message boards that I don't know if they don't if they didn't watch GSP, I don't know if they didn't watch Anderson. I watched George run through a division twice, right? I mean, not just once. He did it twice. He did it twice over with the belt. You know, he fought people that he'd already beat because it was that important to him to maintain a division and to give those fighters, in a way, an opportunity to beat him after they'd already fought. You know, Demetrius Johnson, for whether you like it or not, because, you know, obviously he had the connection to Dillashaw. They wanted that super fight too. He wouldn't do that because he didn't want to hold up his own division. I think, like you said, whether it's greed, I don't want to say whether it's ease, because there is no ease to going up or down a weight class for sure. But at the same time, if you're appealing to what the UFC is trying to do in terms of a product, I can imagine they're sweetening the pot enough where you're going up and down these weight divisions. But as you said, it really muddies the water. And I think when we look back at this, I don't want to say this era, but when we look back at this time frame, as a fan, I'm not enjoying it near as much as I am the consistency of divisions, the consistency of performances, and watching a fighter truly dominate. Instead, it seems like you said, you know, we put it all on the line, one night only, and you get, you know, the magic moments, right? You get the magic moments in the sport, you know, but they don't really have the same meaning, because at the end of the day, did we ever think we were going to see a double champ again after Conor? I mean, I personally didn't. But now you've got better fighters, in my opinion. You know, DC is a much better fighter than Conor McGregor, period. Now he wants to meet that standard. You know, John Jones, in my opinion, better fighter than Cormier. Now, does he not want to come up and say, hey, listen, if DC can be a double champ, if Conor can be a double champ, I want to be a double champ. So now you have to find ways for him to go up to heavyweight and do it. And to me, that's a problem. You're creating your own problems when you do this. Not just for...
And remember, it's worked up until...
No, go ahead.
Yeah, but it's worked comparatively well up until this point. Henry Cejudo, TJ Dillashaw, and, you know, whether you agree with it or not, that was the first one we had a quick stoppage to some people. I thought it was comparatively fair. And so what? Oh, now I want a rematch. Okay, well, that's another one. Well, let's say TJ Dillashaw wins that one, for argument's sake. Then you want a trilogy. Then, you know, it holds up the division forever, 2 divisions. So the Cejudo Dillashaw was the first time we saw the downside. Well, what if you had a bad decision? Well, then you get a rematch, and then there's this. And, you know, all the other double champ fights had been comparatively decisive, obviously. You know, you had the knockouts, so it wasn't a question of who won. The Cejudo Dillashaw fight is the first one where we went, ugh, you can see how this could go wrong. You know, TJ, I want a rematch. Well, then Cejudo would want a third one. You know, what weight class is it in? That we saw it bogging down a little bit. And anything for this steroid thing with or PD thing for TJ Dillashaw is it solves this problem. He's going to be out for a year. You know, Cejudo may fight at 35, he may fight at 25, who knows? But that slowing down of both divisions is that problem is averted for now. And so, you know, we're starting to see with the Cejudo Dillashaw fight the problems inherent to double champ fights. And it's not going away.
No, I don't think it is. I think you've got, you know, with all respect to every fighter, fighting in terms of competition is ultimately about ego. And when you have fighters that are coming in, they all think they are the best. No one, in my opinion, goes into the cage and does not feel like they could beat anyone. That's why they're there. They don't show up there to lose. They show up there because they're going to win. When you have other fighters now that are getting accomplishments, obviously everyone is going to want that same accomplishment, right? It's not grading on a curve, right? You want what the other person has done. You think you're better than the other person. You have to beat that accomplishment. So essentially, you know, in a way, you almost kind of open Pandora's box, because now you've set this, what once was unrealistic goal of being a double champ in 2 different weight divisions. You've not only shown that it can be obtainable, you've kind of given it to Cormier, but now you have to feed these people that want to continue to do it at, like you said, at the detriment of a fan. You know, now I'm not seeing weight divisions play out. And, you know, to go back and like we talked about with Silva and GSP, because I think GSP, in my opinion, was the most notable for just completely wiping out divisions. I mean, he, you know, I guess in a way, Mighty Mouse like held his ground. Like he wanted to fight the Ray Borgs. He wanted to fight a number of people in his division when he could have went out, or they could have brought people in. He didn't want to do that. So it's interesting that if you think about it, him leaving really jives with that dynamic of, hey, we want these double champs. We want these big fights. And I guess, man, I don't know. I don't know if that's how they want to sell the sport now, if that's how they get the casuals' attention. But I mean, it sounds like we're kind of on the same page with. I really just don't like it. I wish we could go back to a much more uniform system. I think part of the problem also it talks about is the weight cutting, because you've got people that are fighting 15 pounds higher, 15 pounds heavier. Like, give me a break. Make somebody declare. It's a whole different conversation, but make somebody declare what they're going to fight and have them stick with that. Instead of just trying to do this, I hate to say it, almost sounds like a publicity stunt, right? It sounds like something out of WWE. We're going to have these double champions. Stop. Just let people fight. Let people live their life in their divisions, and don't worry about cross mingling them. And when you have a super fight, great. When Brock and DC are ready to go, and John Jones and Brock Lesnar are ready to go, let me know. Let me know, and I'll tune in. I'll buy it. Now I got to buy it through ESPN, right? But you're gonna give me a $10 discount after all these years. I'm gonna buy it, and it'll be okay. But I guess since we've kind of talked about that, do you feel like streaming is going to be a problem for them? I'll tell you right now, I don't have, I live in a rural area. A lot of people live in rural areas. Some people coming out of, I guess me interacting with people online and things like that through my YouTube channel and things, people take for granted that internet connections are great everywhere. Streaming is available, in great quantities everywhere. The data is just expendable. I think there's a lot of people that are going to struggle with the concept of I have to purchase a $60 stream and the stream may go down. The stream may freeze. I don't feel comfortable. That's why I've always went through, not even a shameless plug because I hate their service, but I've always went through DirecTV. There's been a confidence when you purchase something through your TV that it's going to be there, that it's going to play. It's not on a web stream. It's not dependent on my horrible internet connection. Do you feel like that's going to impact people at all?
It certainly will. But I was discussing this with Luke Thomas recently, and he was talking about, our fighters not going to want to be on these ESPN cards. Our fans not going to want to sign up for all this stuff? And I said, your implication of choice is undeserved, or you're gonna what? And that's really that's the ace in the hole for the UFC. Is it's their product, and if you want to see every fight, you got to have ESPN Plus. You got to have Fight Pass. If you want to see old ones, we have to go where the UFC goes. We don't have a choice. And he said, "Oh, what if fighters don't want to be on the card? Then they're going to sit your ass." So the idea that we can just say no or choose a different path, no, we can't. I live in a major metropolitan area. My internet's good. I haven't had any problem with any of the streams I've heard people complain about. Mine's been fine. But if it wasn't, what am I going to do? Swear off the sport? And that idea that, the problem with social media these days is it makes it seem as though everything's a democracy. And it's not. In terms of fans go, man, I really hated the Reebok deal. Did you still watch the UFC? Well, yeah. Well, then it doesn't matter what you did or didn't like. I don't like streaming, but I got to watch the fights, so I stream them. Yeah, okay. Well, if you want to watch UFC, you got to go where they go. And so that implication or that illusion of choice, you don't, unless you don't want to watch anymore. That's certainly possible. But when you say, what options do fans have? They don't have one. You go where the UFC goes, or you swear off the sport, which I don't see a lot of people doing.
I've never been a monetary guy with it. I get it. Fight Pass, $100 a year. ESPN Plus, I think I bought it for $50 a year. They're going to give you like a free pay-per-view with it. I think when I draw the line on things, I'll just tell you, I draw the line with Flow Combat. I would really like to have Flow Combat, but I think they want like $30 a month. So when you add all these things in, to me, I don't look at MMA or UFC as something that I could not go without. Like you said, wherever it goes, I'm going to follow it. That's what it is. But I think I'm the exception. I think when you start to tell people, okay, you're going to buy Fight Pass if you want to see these prelims, and you're going to buy ESPN Plus now if you want to watch these fights. I think there's a lot of people that are going to be turned off by that. Now, sure, there's probably just as many people that don't know anything about the UFC that have bought, ESPN Plus for FIFA or for NFL. Maybe they get interested. But I guess your opinion on that, as someone that's had so much more exposure to fans than I have, I've always been amongst the belief that, especially more so with a combat sport than anything else, you either like combat sports or you don't. Like the reason I got into combat sports was because my parents, as I was growing up, huge boxing fans. We would always buy, the boxing fights. Got to watch Tyson a whole bunch of times. So it was a natural progression for me to go in and watch MMA. I remember getting the old, everybody has these stories where somebody, exposed you a VHS type of UFC, or I actually had a friend of mine that would buy them on his black box. And we all have those stories, but I don't know anyone that I've ever met in any UFC gathering I've ever spoke to was like, yeah, I was, in my like mid-20s and I never heard of UFC or MMA. And all of a sudden it was just on and I figured, oh, I'll just watch it. And now I became a big fan. It just doesn't seem like something that someone's going to pick up. In fact, I would tell you that there's more people in my life that know that I follow the UFC and they hear about it and they look at me differently because, it is still a young sport. And they look at you like you're some barbarian that wants to go see two dudes die in a cage one day. And there's
novelty days are over.
Yes.
When people were drawn to it because it seemed like the cool thing to do, or like, wow, I never heard it. That's over. Most people at least understand what you're talking about. When you say MMA, you say the UFC, they at least get they've been exposed to it. It's not like they just don't know. Okay. And so the days when people were drawn to it because it was something different, and like, God, we've never seen anything like this before, blah, blah. That's 20 years ago. It's 15 years ago. It's a long time ago. Now, it's not like you're going to discover it on ESPN. Okay, if you turn on your television, you see a commercial with UFC fighters on it now. It's gotten big enough so that you're exposed anyway. And I agree with you 100%. If you don't know by now, you don't know. If you're not interested in by now, you're not interested in it. If you're not a fan by now, you're not a fan. The question is how many people kind of in that somewhat gray area, or I'm a fan as long as it's convenient. I'm a fan as long as I don't have to pay a lot of money for it. I'm a fan as long as you might lose those. And unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to put it, only the UFC and only ESPN have access to whether or not it's working. There are no public ratings for internet streaming services. They can keep this secret as long as they want to. The number one question I always got asked for years, whatever happened to Fight Quest on Discovery Channel? I got asked that ad nauseum. And I said the ratings weren't any good, so it's not on the air anymore. There's only one reason why a show doesn't exist anymore. That's it. So the UFC and ESPN, they know whether or not it's working. We don't. And if it isn't, they're going to change things around because the holy dollar, which is generated by numbers and subscriptions, that defines everything. If a bunch of people log off and they're not subscribing, they're going to change things around. But it's going to be at least a year delay for that because it's going to be a while before anybody they decide that they've made a mistake. That's not an easy thing to do.
And they seldom admit that they made a mistake. It's interesting you brought up Fight Quest because when I think of casuals, right? When I think of trying to draw a casual into the sport, there's two shows that come to mind. Fight Quest being one, but Bully Beatdown being the next.
Oh, thank you.
And those shows, right? Those shows were designed to bring attention to the sport in a very fun way. And I'll tell you right now, for Bully Beatdown, if you actually go back and look at the roster of fighters that they put on, it almost is like the who's who. There, Eddie Alvarez. I go back and I think of Eddie's episode, and it's like, could you imagine now, like, you were that kid that got beat up, right? And you're like, oh yeah, no, there's one time I was on the show and I fought a guy that fought Conor McGregor, because everyone knows Conor McGregor. That guy right now has incredible bragging rights, but to your point, those shows are off the air. It takes a lot. It takes a lot to get a show off the air on MTV, apparently, because I've seen some of the worst shows in creation on that. So for them to kind of admit that defeat, that's where I get worried, right? That's where I get worried about the like you said, the gray area fans. Where is this middle ground of fans? To me, like you said, I mean, they're not coming. Anytime I've went to an event, listen, I just went to UFC 235. The ticket prices were insane. There's no casual fan. To me, at least in my mind, there's no casual fan that's walking up to the box office and saying, you know what? I got $400 burning a hole in my pocket. Even in Vegas, I've got $400 burning a hole in my pocket. Let me sit high, like 200 section. I got nothing else to do today. I just don't see that being the case. I mean, I'm getting ready to go to this UFC Philadelphia card. I'll sit like low 100 level for the same price there. I actually sit two people low 100 for the same price that I would sit, high 200. There's no casual fan that went to UFC 236 or 235, excuse me, and said, let me take this $300 poster home like I did. It just doesn't happen. Where are these people? Where are you finding these people? If anything, you are taking your fan base that you constantly tell me you care about, you appreciate, you respect, you're thankful of, and you're putting us more and more and more in a box. And I'm not the one that's going to break, right? You're not the one that's going to break either. It's someone out there right now that's probably not listening at the 35-minute mark because they already broke. They're like, listen, I'm done. I'm done with this.
Yeah, our target audience, we know what they are. We know who could hang out and listen to it.
But I just don't think it's a wise idea. I was actually shocked when it came out. I thought in the beginning, you know, it's funny you mentioned the Reebok deal, because the Reebok deal is what got me blocked by old Dana. Because, you know, in the beginning, that was a bad situation. And I think anyone will admit that. The uniforms were plain. They weren't the fanciest looking. I mean, they were plain. They were boring. It just didn't look good, right? But Reebok has done incredible things. I know firsthand. I know firsthand they've done incredible things with their fighters and what they do and what they put on now. But it's had to grow to get to that point. And I guess, you know, you kind of want to see the ESPN thing grow. But every time they've tried, even recently, like the Stephen A. Smith stuff. And I like Stephen A. Smith. I know people will probably shut the video off right now for that. I like Stephen A. Smith because of what he did. I like that he came on there for free. I like that he tried to get eyes to the sport. But again, I'm just confused, man. Like you have to sell me to it. Where is the gray area fan? Where is the person that's not going to watch it all of a sudden watch it because it's on ESPN Plus? I don't think it's going to happen. And I think that's going to hurt. I really do. I think that hurts everything. I think that hurts the fighter. That hurts the sponsors. That hurts the whole picture, because you've essentially isolated this whole group. And don't get me wrong, they're still going to be on regular ESPN. But when you only have your avenue for pay-per-view for an individual, I don't go to bars to watch fights. That's just my preference, because I know what'll happen, right? I mean, funny, not a funny story, but I've only had like almost altercations at fights twice. One was actually at a football game, and the other one was at UFC 235, where just guy in front of me just saying things that just had to cease. You know, and you try, you know, it's just a ball of testosterone, right? Everyone there believes they should have been in the cage, apparently. And I was like, listen, man, you know, first of all, there's women up here that's with the group I'm with. Could you tone it down from, like, you know, the 15 that you're at to maybe like a 4? Like, I really don't care what you think about these people. Whoa, what was that?
That was my pit bull growling at a cat that's outside.
Oh my Lord.
No.
The pit bulls,
two of them at the same time. Yeah,
see, and like, it's funny. That's perfect timing, because I attempted to be that pit bull and he attempted to be that cat. But at the same time, you know, you have to think, like, these are the things that happen at these. You know, these are the things that happen. But you know, your pit bull scared me, so I lost my train of thought on this. I really did.
Oh yeah, well, what we're talking about is. We're talking about.
He did it to you too. He did this. Pit bull has
the mid. Well, I was just so into what you were saying.
He double champed.
The mid-range fan. The mid-range fan is what you're talking. The gray area fan. And you talk about the two fights you got into.
Okay, yeah. So that's not a gray area fan, though, right? Like, you just don't casually go up and want to have a physical altercation with someone else at an event.
Yes, exactly.
If you don't care, right? If you don't care, no one's going to a curling event, right? And getting mad when someone's yelling at the block of ice, to that point. But everyone here, it's just a different status of fan. And like I said, it's not as if they've taken it away from us, but they've really put us in that box. And I appreciate what they've tried to do to bring in those casuals. I really will say, if there's one positive thing about ESPN, it's the fact that ESPN does a great job on documentaries. They always have. 30 for 30, run down the list. They did a great thing on one of my favorite fighters, Roy Jones Jr. You can go back and watch, like, that In the Life piece they did. Absolutely beautiful. I think the only time Roy Jones Jr. had, like, his family on camera. Did an amazing job of that. They really help sell the athlete, market the athlete, promote the person. And I think UFC, for all that they tried to do with the embedded series, they had really not done a good job at trying to expose people to the fact that MMA is really a family sport. I've worked in a lot of different sports. I will tell you firsthand. You know, listen, this is the first time we've talked today. MMA is a culture of people. And they're generally, that's a lie. This isn't the first time we talked. We'll talk about that in a moment. MMA is a culture. It's a culture of people that are like-minded. You know, the first time I walked in, I've been to one bad MMA gym, right? But the second gym that I have now makes up for all those bad experiences. Because it's just a culture. You know, I was in racing for like 8 years. I never felt that I was a part of a group the same way I do when you're at a gym. And it's funny because everyone that you run into is like-minded. Everyone that you're into has similar experiences, and they all just really care. Like, you know, on the outside looking in, the casual, like I said, man, I tell people, oh, I'm going to go out to this UFC event, and they just have that, you know, they either know it or they think like the cage is dripping in blood when it's all said and done. Or when, you know, you tell somebody, oh yeah, no, I go to a gym and, you know, there's people that fight out of the gym. They just have it's just a bad reputation. And I just think ESPN isn't doing much for that. So since I did tease that, I got to run into you. I guess I got to meet you in Moncton. I was with Anthony Smith. We went into the little media room where you were asking him all the questions.
Yes.
And you actually had jokingly said, you know, we were talking about, well, I was a spectator in the conversation. They were talking about times where people had said things online and how you just needed to zone them out. You know, there was talks about Vulcan and Anthony, and Anthony's like, listen, I just got to ignore it. I can't even read it. And you actually made the comment, I didn't even know I looked like Joe Rogan until I started reading comments online. And from that moment, I decided every time I saw you, I was going to say, oh my God, there's Joe Rogan. To the point that in an elevator, as you were leaving the hotel, I was walking in and I said, oh my God, there's Joe Rogan. There was a group of people behind us that heard this. And I don't know if you understand this, Joe Rogan, just slightly more popular than you, just by a skosh, right?
A wee bit, yes.
A wee bit more noticeable.
Slightly more financially secure. Let's put it that way.
So you were wearing a jacket because I believe it was pretty cold in Moncton. It was October, so it had to have been cold. It was beautiful.
Cold. Yeah, it was cold.
It was a beautiful town. Honestly, I don't remember the weather. I remember Vulcan getting choked out, and I remember it was an absolutely beautiful town. But I don't believe that any of the tattoos that would distinguish Mr. Rogan from yourself would have been visible. They then followed me into the elevator and began chatting amongst themselves that you were honestly Joe Rogan. And I did not, I really had like a moment in my mind where I was like, you know, do I really turn around and say to them like, hey, listen, I was just being a jerk. That guy's name is Jimmy Smith and he's an MMA commentator. Or do I let them text their children and be like, you're not going to believe who we just bumped into?
Do you want to take that moment away from them?
I did.
Do you really want to tell them there's no Santa Claus? Did you really want to do that?
I would not compare Joe Rogan to Santa Claus. I would say you were like the Tooth Fairy or the Easter Bunny. It was that level of excitement they had. You were the quarter underneath their pillow, and I did not want to take it away and say, listen, it wasn't Joe Rogan. But I'm sure I was part of me, and I'll say this to you with supreme confidence, part of me was hoping they would bump into you again and ask you like for a picture, because I would always wanted to have known what your response to that would have been. So I'll ask you, did this ever publicly happen? Did you publicly get confronted as being Joe Rogan? And when that happened, how did you handle? Oh, I'm assuming it happened because I did.
I've never been totally mistaken for Joe Rogan where someone thought I was him. That's never happened. I've had literally dozens of people tell me I look like him on the street. You know who you look like? I'm like, yeah, Joe Rogan. I get that. One time, just to explain the flip side, this is how my life works. I was actually on Catalina Island off Long Beach, California, where I grew up. And we're on the beach, and a guy comes up to me and is a UFC fan, and he goes, hey, man, can I take a picture with you, man? I'm a big fan. I said, oh, thanks. Yeah, no problem. Then we took a picture together. One of the waiters walks up to me and goes, dude, was that guy famous? The guy I took a picture with. He's asking me who that is. And I'm like, oh, yeah, no, he's a big deal. He had no idea who I was. No clue. He asked me, God, is that other guy famous? And I made up some story about how the other guy was famous. He thought I was taking a picture with him. So, yeah, it does happen to me periodically. I've never been outright mistaken for him. And I've never had any difficulties with anyone being negative to me in public, in person. Plenty online. I think everyone has. But, yeah, never in person. So I've been pretty lucky.
I would love to know what the cost would. I'm sure you've seen those, like those sleeves that are like nylon that you can get that look like you have like full arm sleeve tattoos. I wonder what would happen if you could get those to mock Rogan's tattoos, even closely. And then you put those on and you walked around, like say just a venue. I wonder how many people with like a black button up would run into you and think that it was him. It would be interesting. I would really like to know, because, you know, I guess you would be the second famous person in MMA that gets confused at times for someone else. The other being, the John Jones on Twitter, not being the John Jones, which he is actually...
He has milked like crazy. He's made a career out of it.
I was going to say, here's the worst part about that. If you think about it in this context, this should ruin your day. He made a career about being confused with John Jones. You had to make a career to get to the point you would be confused with Joe Rogan. That's so unfair.
Yeah. Very, very different. I had to kind of climb a totally different road. What's very interesting is that when Joe and I are actually in the same place at the same time, we don't look very similar.
I know. That's disappointing to me.
That's the funny thing is when we're actually next to each other, our builds are really, really different. We don't look that similar. It's when you put us on camera and you focus us in on us in a certain way where all the scale's gone, we look different. In real life, we really don't look that similar. It's actually kind of strange.
I would say if they had done like one of those, and they probably would have by now if it was still on the air, the old MTV Deathmatch, or what was it? What was the claymation?
Celebrity Deathmatch.
Celebrity Deathmatch. If they had done you versus him, they would have had to do nothing to either model. They would have just like had to put on the tats, and that would have been it. It would have been so easy for those claymation guys.
One of the greatest, I guess it was an insult, but I loved it. Somebody actually said online, Jimmy looks like the default character in the original UFC game. And I laughed my ass off because every time I used to play one of those games, the default character, before you put anything on him, looks like me. Like it's just this bald dude. And I would just go, all right, cool, great. I was clicking. I'd play with that guy because it looked exactly like me. And I totally, completely agree. I laughed my ass off at that one. I thought it was hilarious. Yeah.
The funny side of that is Anthony Smith is not in UFC 3. So technically you could lay claim to being more in a UFC game than someone that just fought for a world championship.
I could argue that I'm the default character in a lot of games. That's based on me. There's got to be some lawsuits in the future.
You should definitely look into that. I mean, I'm sure there's a lawyer somewhere that is aching to take that case, especially if they didn't do it without your permission.
I could just pretend every mannequin's based on my likeness and go crazy with that.
You have to get on this before Joe Rogan does, though.
Yeah,
because he has that same look. So, technically he could be pre-tat Joe Rogan and say, hey, listen, I'm this person too. So you've got to push on this. You did mention.
I'll put a pin in that, buddy. I'll put a pin in that.
Put a pin in that. Yes. And the dog. The dog is the double champ for the show because he won the belt from me and you when he scared the life out of us.
Oh, he is. They're right by. I deal with that all the time. So when a dog walks by, my dog does not like cats. So he tends to do that. And there are two of them. So.
Small world. But before you came on, I was sitting here and I'm alone and I'm like, what is this rustling? Like I kept hearing this rustling. There's no wind, right? So I'm like, nothing's going on. And I go over and I kind of walk almost outside where I was. And there's a cat like down, like frolicking in leaves outside. And I'm like, why is this cat here? But I'm relieved because that's what the noise was. There's no one plotting to kill me. But you did mention, I guess, to put a cap on things, you did mention kinetic tape. Now, you have not used kinetic tape.
You asked me about it. I've never used it before.
It's interesting because just about the two gyms that I've went to, there's been someone there that's been a major proponent of KT tape. And I've never used it. I jammed a finger on Monday and somebody was like, hey, I've got something great for that. I'm like, yeah, I don't need Tiger Balm. I don't need, any of that stuff. I know what you're going to give me. He's like, no, try this KT tape. And I'm like, yeah, no, that's complete placebo. There's no way that does anything properly. Sure enough, if it is placebo, I'll agree with it, but it did seem to work to the point that I ordered a bunch of it. And this will be another thing we can probably talk about since we're there. I had never had any type of experience with, I guess first of all, I'll say I did leave my past gym. I guess you've left gyms, right? You've left gyms. You train and you had to leave one to move, right?
Yes, I've left a couple.
You ever left a gym for a bad experience?
Yes.
How many?
One,
just okay. Well, then we're tied. We're tied. With
I generally get along pretty well with people, and it's not an issue. But one gym I had to leave over a bad experience, and all the other ones were cool.
Yeah, my first gym was a bad experience. My first gym actually almost turned me off to the whole thing. It was such a bad experience. I was constantly, I come in there and I really don't know the whole ins and outs. I just get mauled. I mean, I was getting mauled by blue belts, brown belts, black belts. They would just, I've learned now the better application of someone that does not know what they're doing is to let them put you in really bad situations and then try to work your way out of it from the novice, that doesn't know how to complete a choke. I didn't know that at the time. I was just getting beat up a lot. So I ended up leaving that gym, going to the gym I'm at now, and it's night and day. It's two different worlds. But the kinetic tape guy also is a big proponent of the grappler soap, which I never played into. I got a staph infection at the old gym too. I got a staph infection in my foot, whether it was from a dirty mat or what, I don't know how it got there. I just know that it got there. And I know that I wasn't the only one that had it. It was literally one of the worst experiences I've ever went through. I actually had to stay in the hospital. They put me in the hospital overnight. They had it got in my blood. They had to IV me, all kinds of horrible stuff. But he's a big proponent of the grappler soap. Now, I've been around fighters that have been sponsored by it, right? They'll, and they wear it because they're sponsored by it. Have you ever believed in the fact that you should not be using an antimicrobial soap that would kill it, but rather because obviously the thought process is the soap will be, or the infection would become immune to the antibacterial soap, but rather kind of like the herbal soap that will just kind of nullify it in a way?
Well, my thing is I haven't gotten a lot of skin stuff from jiu-jitsu. I got a lot when I was wrestling back in high school and stuff. Apparently wrestling mats, the way they're designed or whatever it is, wrestling was way worse for me. I never got a lot of skin stuff or staph or anything like that from jiu-jitsu. In high school with wrestling mats, I used to get it comparatively frequently. And yeah, it's just one of those things where it sucked and I put some tenactin on it and it went away. I've heard great things about things like defense soap and stuff like that. But a lot of it, what I've noticed is for wrestlers more than jiu-jitsu guys. Could be the gi, could be a lot of different things. And we tend to be more clothed than wrestlers. But man, when I was wrestling, it happened all the time, much less so in jiu-jitsu for me personally. I
try not to be a big gi guy. I try to, even in a gi, I'll wear my rash guard, which I think probably is another big proponent of it. But also, I guess in a lot of smaller gyms, our mats are double mat or like double purpose mats. Though it's also it's like a mat with a half cage. So there's not just the grappling that goes on there or the jiu-jitsu. It's also like they'll scenario based cage fighting in there. So we have to deal with our sweat in grappling, and then the kickboxer sweat in the kickboxing scenarios. And you can clean these mats a million different ways. I'm a firm believer you'll never get that mat clean. It's just got too many crevices and stuff. But I will say I did break down, I think it was about $40. What an investment, right? When you spend $40 on tape and soap, like your life is going in. See there, but listen, to bring things for a full circle, you can't spend $40 on tape and soap and then question a $50 a year ESPN purchase.
You cannot, my friend.
So if you're living that life,
right? All right.
If you're living that life, you're already too far in. And if you're living that life, you probably made it to the 52.5 minute mark of this show, whatever it is. I don't know what it is, but it is something because now it's been created. Could be love
you're feeling if you got in this far, but I appreciate everyone listening. You guys and gals are absolutely awesome. And Ryan, I got to appreciate the opportunity. You're reaching out. By the way, Ryan is the one that contacted me and said, you have to do a podcast with me, and stayed on me until I did it through my move and everything. And Ryan, I very much appreciate it. All right,
kids, harassment works. If you learned anything.
It does. If there's a bullet point of this presentation, there's when you wrapped up, just go after them until they say yes, because that's what Ryan did, and I appreciate it, buddy.
And to close that, there's a fine line between harassment and persistence. Please, for your law enforcement's sake, do not cross the line. The other person will let you know.
I appreciated the nudes you sent me. The nudes you sent me, I appreciated them, Ryan. Not bad at all. It did motivate me to get on here.
All right. Well, we are hopefully going to continue to do this. I guess I will echo all the sentiments you made about the unbelievable great people that were so gracious with their time. They devoted an hour to this. Or as a helpful fact, if it's on YouTube, you can always go speed it up by like 1.5, and you could make this like a 40-minute thing.
Yeah,
that's what I always do. And then when you listen to it normal, you're like, why are these guys talking so slow? So do that. You'll actually find yourself listening to a lot more. I appreciate everyone again, and we will be back very shortly with more commentary.